employment. Okay, according to the classical theory of employment, there will be full employment in the economy, and there will be full employment in the economy, and there is no what is called inflation in the country. Based on that assumption that the classical theory was developed. Okay, they assumed full employment as a normal situation, and the unemployment is a temporary situation, as we discussed in the last class. Okay, during the 1930s, whatever the classical theory was developed based on their assumption, that is full employment, always a normal condition. But that was not, that was failed during the 1930s. Okay, during the 1930s, when there was a great economic depression called economic crisis, okay, great economic depression or crisis, when there was a crisis was started, and unemployment became a normal situation. Okay, unemployment became a what is called a normal situation. So, but the classical theory is saying that full employment is a normal situation. But after this 1930s, when the great economic depression was happened, after that in any economy, the unemployment became a normal situation, and full employment equilibrium was not restored automatically. Okay, classical theory is saying that always full employment is situated if any, because of some causes, in the temporary situation, in temporary conditions, if the things will be any unemployment was created, so they suggested that automatically again the economy will be restored, and full employment will be again will achieve. So that is what the classical theory was developed, the theory. Okay, yeah. So whenever we are talking about this theory, okay, whenever we are talking about this particular theory, okay, according to this theory, yeah, in this situation, that is which situation? So when there is an unemployment, became a normal situation. So in this particular aspect, so in this situation, the John Maynard Keynes, which is popularly known as James Keynes. Okay, James Keynes, in his book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. So this book was written by James Keynes in 1936, and he was criticizing the classical theory. So that is full employment was always normal situation. So inflation less economy will be restored automatically. So these were the concept was developed by the classical theories, but the James Keynes was criticizing this concept. Okay, according to James Keynes, so the economy will not be restored automatically. The unemployment situation always will be the normal situation. The full employment will not be there in the any economy, even in the developed countries also. So like that, so James Keynes was criticized the classical theory and developed the new theory and alternate theory, so which is called this modern theory. So and introduced many concepts like effective demand. In the new theory, he was developed the new concept. Okay, he was developed many new concepts, like one of the thing is called effective demand. Okay, like effective demand is one concept. Preference to consume is one of the concept. Okay, many concept he was introduced like effective demand and propensity to consume, like multiplier, like marginal efficiency of the capital. Okay, marginal efficiency of capital and liquidity preferences. Like many concept he was introduced, James Keynes. Okay, but even though he was introducing many concepts like all these properties to consume, okay, multiplier, marginal efficiency of capital, liquidity preference, effective demand. So all these type of the new concept was introduced by James Keynes. But among all this one, the concept of the effective demand is the main important concept in the Keynesian theory of the employment. Okay, even though he was introduced many concepts, among them, so this is very, very important. So the effective demand concept is the one of the most important concept which was developed by J.M. Keynes. So according to the J.M. Keynes, okay, according to J.M. Keynes, so the effective demand is the backbone for his theory. Okay, it is the main important for his theory. So that's why, according to Keynes, the unemployment results from the deficiency of the effective demand. Why there will be unemployment in the country? Unemployment result because of the deficiency in the effective demand. Okay, deficiency in the effective demand, and the employment level can be increased by increasing the level of effective demand. Okay, so the unemployment is creating in the country because of the deficiency of the effective demand. So that's why if the effective demand is going to create the employment, okay, the both are having the we can say like by increasing by the level of the employment, we can increase the level of the effective demand. By increasing the effective demand, we can increasing the level of the employment. So they both have the relations. So that's why effective demand is the backbone of the Keynesian employment. So for the Keynesian theory of employment, so the effective of the demand is called a backbone of this Keynesian theory, because so compared with the backbone means so this was very, very so important concept what we can say. Okay, so that's why so this is very important. Like what is effective demand? Effective demand is nothing but it indicates the total demand for the goods and services at the various levels of the employment. So like each and every level of the employment, how much the total demand for goods and services is going to be the effective demand. Okay, each and every level of the employment, what is the total demand for the goods and services in the country? Okay, that relation is going to be explaining in the name of the effective demand. So effective demand is a different level of the employment represents the aggregate demand. Okay, each and every level of the employment, how much demand is there for the goods called aggregates demand. That is total demand, and there will be a level of employment where aggregate demand equals to aggregate supply, and this will be called effective demand point. So here, level of the employment will be determined the aggregate supply. Aggregate supply nothing but production. Level of the production. Aggregate demand, the employment level also decides the aggregate demand. Because whenever there is an aggregate, whenever there is an employment, okay, whenever there is an employment, automatically their income level will be increased. When the people are having the more income, automatically their purchasing power will be increased. That is, demand will be increased. So that's why level of the employment, one side it will increase the aggregate demand, and another side of the level of the employment will increase the production. If the production increases, supply will increase. Where the demand and supply is going to be get the equilibrium. So there, there is a one point. That point is known as the what is called effective demand. So according to Keynes, the value of aggregate demand at the point of the aggregate demand function where it is intersected by the aggregate supply function will be called the effective demand. So like that, according to this theory, generally, okay, this will be the aggregate demand. Okay, this will be the aggregate supply. Okay, this is the aggregate demand. Okay, this will be aggregate supply, where the aggregate demand and aggregate supply will get the intersected each other. So that point is known as the effective demand. Okay, that point is known as the effective demand. Okay, there the level of the employment will be decided. Employment will be decided. How it was? So to know that one, first of all, we have to understand what is aggregate demand. Okay, here the aggregate demand price, aggregate demand or aggregate demand price, everything is same. Aggregate demand price is the amount of money which the entrepreneurs expect to get by selling the output produced by the number of men employed or in the expected revenue from the sale of output produced at the particular level of the employment. Okay, at the particular level of the employment, there will be some production. Okay, at that production, by selling in the market, how much revenue they are expecting? Expecting revenue by selling the production which is produced by the given employment. Okay, employment is called aggregate demand price. So this aggregate demand price and aggregate demand function are scheduled shows the various aggregate demand prices at the different level of the employment. Okay, different levels of the employment, how much the aggregate demand or total demand is there for goods and services. We'll explain the aggregate demand price or aggregate demand schedule. Okay, so aggregate demand function like that. So it shows that the aggregate demand price rises with an increase the level of the employment. So employment level increases, aggregate demand also increases. If the employment increases, income increases to the people. If the income increases to the people, automatically purchasing power will increase. That is called demand. So that's why it shows that the aggregate demand price rises with the increase the level of the employment and declines the lower level of the employment. So which is explaining to demand is a function of N. N nothing but employment. Okay, N nothing but that one. So where the D is called aggregate demand, F is a functional relationship between demand and this one, and L is a level of the employment. Okay, level of the employment. So like aggregate supply means supply, production. So each level of the employment involves a certain amount of the money covering the cost of the production, including the normal profits which the entrepreneur must be get back. So here the producer is producing the commodity means the producer at least will try to expect normal profits. At least production cost. At least production cost. So that's why each and every level of the employment, how much production cost is there? So how much production was there? By selling that much production in the market, at least minimum you will get back the production cost or not. Production cost including the normal profits. Okay, that is. So at a given level of the employment, aggregate supply price is the total amount of the money which all the entrepreneurs in the economy expect to receive from the sale of output produced at the given level of the employment. How much revenue they will expect by selling the production in the market with the given level of the employment will be known as the aggregate supply price. Okay, this aggregate supply price schedule or function shows the various aggregate supply prices at different levels of the employment. Okay, at different levels of the employment. So the aggregate supply schedule is going to be explaining. So aggregate supply price rises with the increase in the level of the employment, and when the level of the employment decreases, aggregate supply declines. Okay, aggregate supply declines. So S is a function of N. N is a level of employment. S is a aggregate supply. So this where this aggregate demand and aggregate supply is going to get the equilibrium, there that point is called effective demand. So like okay, the level of the employment and output in the economy is determined at the point where aggregate price equal to aggregate supply price. So which is known as the effective demand. Effective demand is a point where aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price get the equilibrium. That point is known as the effective demand. Okay, it is the point where what the entrepreneurs expect to receive the equals to what they must be received, the profits are maximized. Aggregate demand nothing but how much income they are expecting. Aggregate supply nothing but how much at least they are getting the minimum production cost or not. So if where this both are going to be equal, so there the one point will be there, that point will be called effective demand. Okay, this point is called effective demand. And here the entrepreneurs earn the only normal profits. So entrepreneurs earn only normal profits, not abnormal profits. Okay, as long as aggregate demand price, ADP, nothing but aggregate demand price, is higher than the aggregate supply price, the prospects of the getting profits are greater when the additional workers are being employed. When the demand is more than the supply, whenever aggregate demand, see, as long as aggregate demand supply is higher than the aggregate demand price is higher than the aggregate supply price. Okay, the receiving the income is more than the normal profit. Okay, that means more production will be encouraged, more employment will be generated. So like that, so the additional workers will be employed in the economy. So this process will be continued till where aggregate demand price and aggregate supply will be get the equilibrium. Okay, the point of the effective demand is not necessarily a full employment equilibrium, but it may be under the employment equilibrium. So we are saying that effective employment, there the employment level will be determined. But that determine the employment level may be full employment, may not be full employment. Keynes told that always they will be underemployment only. So now means not full employment. So something like this. So if you see this table, okay, this is the employment level. See, whenever the employment level increases, the aggregate demand also increasing like this. So purchasing power of the people is increasing. So whenever the employment level is increasing, the supply also increasing. See, supply also increasing. So here at this point, the both aggregate demand and aggregate supply was got equilibrium. At 30 lakhs employment, aggregate demand and aggregate supply both were called. So this point may be known as the effective demand. Okay, here the employment will be decided. Up to this point, there will be profit. So if we go beyond that one, the profits may not be there. Okay, here the supply is more than the demand. If there is a supply is more than the demand, the producers, where you will sell the production because no purchasing by the people. So that will be waste to the people. So that's why, so that this same point we are expressing in terms of this one. So this is called what is called aggregate supply. Aggregate supply price. Then this is called aggregate demand price. Where the level of the employment, aggregate demand and aggregate supply is decided. This is called employment level. Employment level. So here the employment was decided. If the aggregate demand was increasing, the level of the employment also increased, something like that. So that's why if the level of the employment was increased, so the supply was increased from here. So here it will be get the equilibrium. So like that. So that's why the effective demand will create the more employment in the country. That is what we can say. So that's why in this particular cases, we can understand that the equilibrium level of the employment is determined by the interaction of the aggregate supply and aggregate demand occurs. This is the point is called effective demand. The corresponding to this point, OLE workers are employed. Okay, OLE employees are employed initially, and at the OL1 level of the employment, so at this level, okay, at this level, expected revenue, that is aggregate demand, getting the least profit, that is called aggregate supply. Okay, so expected receipt exceed the necessary cost by the amount of RC. Entrepreneurs will now go on hiring more labor because the demand is more than the supply. To supply the production according to the demand, there should be more production in the country. That's why to increase more production, so they will go hire the laborers. So the entrepreneurs will go on hiring more labor till OLE level of the employment reach. So OLE means again where the aggregate demand is touched with the aggregate supply. So at this level, the employment entrepreneurs' expectations of the profits are maximized. Okay, maximized the profits. So employment beyond OLE is unprofitable because cost exceeds the revenue. So if the production will be more than that one, the cost exceeds the revenue. So it will be lost to the entrepreneurs. That's why they will not go for that one. So thus actual employment for sort of full employment, Keynes system shows two kinds of the equilibrium. One is actual employment, equilibrium determined by aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves, and underemployment equilibrium shows the situation of the equilibrium at less than the full employment level. Okay, less than the full employment level.